Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Science Dispatch podcast. Very excited to be with you as always. My name is Cameron English, joined again, as always, eternally, by Dr. Chuck Dinnerstein, Director of Medicine at the American Council on Science and Health. Chuck, what's going on, my man?
Not a thing, but thank you for that eternal thought. As I get older, I do look forward to how things are going. So eternally sounds good at this point. I'm good with that.
Hey, I'm happy. Anything to offer encouragement?
Plus, it's spring. It's spring, baby, and I can't wait to get back outside.
Yeah, for your touch football program, right? That you're. All right. Well, we have an interesting. I need new adjectives, Chuck. You have an insightful story here, a thoughtful story, and you're approaching something that I think many people don't talk about, at least in this context. So this article you wrote, it's called The Hidden Costs of America's Sports Betting Boom. So here's your introduction, and then you fill in the details for us. While our ancestors wagered on chariot races and blood sport outcomes, today's high-tech hustlers are busy cashing in on online odds. As billions are wagered on sporting events and online platforms dominate the industry, an emerging public health challenge, one that includes depression, bipolar disorders, and suicidal behavior, demands our attention. So a minor blip, really. This is not a huge crisis, just something we should address when we have some spare time, is what I'm getting at.
I think it certainly is worth attending to a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to start with my biases here, because I do have some. First of all, I've never been very good at any game of chance. It's just throw the money down the toilet. It will save time. It's not entertaining. It's upsetting. I've done actually better. When it comes to betting, I do better as a physician than in a gambling situation. Second confession to make is that I am the sports equivalent of a wedding and wake Catholic. I will tune in for 2 or 3 various sporting events over the course of the year, but I do not follow sports, which makes me somewhat of a pariah with some of my friends. But that's the case. Having now said that, now that it is March Madness is upon us, it's time to talk a little bit about sports betting, because I think it's going to become a increasing problem in some ways. So the article begins by talking about when sports betting began, which ironically goes back to Pete Rose, and who's now being considered for a pardon by the president. And his conduct in betting on games, including ones that he was involved with, led to what was called the Professional and Amateur Sports Protection Act, which basically said that state governments could not allow sports betting. And in 2018, several decades later, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that that was unconstitutional. And since then, sports betting has been a growth industry overall. When the Supreme Court decided that it was no longer constitutional and that sports betting can go ahead, the betting in 2018 was $6.6 billion. It's now about $121 billion and shows no sign of slowing up. But what's really changed, of course, over time is that instead of the betting being done person to person or in an OTB, an off-track betting facility, it's now gone digital, as is everything else. And the most convenient source of betting today is that smartphone that we all carry around. And that has raised some concerns. So a guy named John Ayers did a study. He's been looking at our use of the digital platforms for some time. And in this case, he used searches by on Google for gambling addiction as a proxy measure for gambling addiction in general. So all of the research that he did is based on a proxy, and we can go back and forth about how accurate that proxy may be. But what he basically found was that there's been an increasing number of searches for help with gambling addiction online since 2018, since the return of sports betting overall. And he raises the concern that sports betting has some neurobiological underpinnings that would go along with what we've been describing as substance use disorders, and that we clearly know that a gambling addiction has a variety of social and financial impacts, and he's raised the concern about whether we should do something about it. So we're going to pause there. I went and looked at some other studies, and it turns out that the people most likely to become addicted to sports gambling are, oddly enough, males in their ages 20 to 30 whose friends are involved with sports gambling and have money to spend. And they are far more likely to get themselves into trouble with gambling than most other people. And the reason I went and looked for that is because of the recommendations that were made, because the researchers made the usual kind of recommendations that we make about syntaxes, kind of channeling that the tobacco approaches, which was to have education, cut down on advertising, increasing the age limit for people allowed to bet, though in reality, I don't know how you can tell about somebody's age online anymore. How do you verify that? And of course, some kind of available online intervention on the gambling platforms besides saying if you have a problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER. And while I thought that those were all interesting ideas that we've talked about before, I don't think that they really get at how we might do that. And so I thought one way to get at this problem would be to put the onus on the banking element of these bets. These people are making bets online, so there's being money transferred back and forth, and there is a Know Your Customer banking regulation which requires banks to verify who their customers actually are. It was set up, to prevent other forms of illegality. But with that regulation already in place, let the banks enforce and show that the person that they're signing on board is actually 21 years old, and do it that way. And I thought that was an easy way to get around it, because to hope that the sports books are going to police themselves, especially with respect to their best customer, the problem gambler, I don't think that's going to happen. So there you are.
So my first question to you, because there's so many I want to ask, is is this solvable? I don't know that it is in the way that they're presenting it. It's sort of, it's like they have a model for addressing problem behaviors, and whether it works or not, they just know that this is the pathway you follow.
Right.
It's
I don't think
yeah.
any of the things they suggested have worked for any of the other sins that we're currently committing. So why would this one be any different?
Yeah, the only thing that worked for tobacco is like they made smoking so expensive and over time so socially unacceptable that they just like browbeat people out of combustible tobacco use. And even then, there's still 30 million people who smoke.
So I think that there's two pieces of that. Certainly there's very good evidence that if you charge more, less people will do whatever activity it is that you're charging more for. There's a lot of elasticity in that system. So I mean, for the sugary beverages, you add a tax on it, people buy less of them. Doesn't mean that they get to be healthier, but they buy less of them. So that there's certainly that part. I think they could do that, and they could continue to add taxes. The state's already making big bucks off of these programs. And one of the points that they make is that very much like the tobacco settlement, very little of the money coming into the state is funneled to the health problems and the other problems that are a result of sports betting. They're using that money in the general fund fill potholes or whatever it is that they want to during the week. But I think the other interesting thing when you talk about the change in tobacco use is that it took a generation and a half for that change to take place. You have to let that generation that was doing it die. I that's there's certain things I'm just not going to change my way about at this point. I still like Popeye's chicken. You can tell me everything you want, and it's just not going to change. If you expect to see major changes in population-based habits, I think you have to wait for the generations to change over. I think when you look at some of the stuff that they talk about now, where you see the 20-year-olds drinking less. I think that's something that you're going to see hanging around for some time. That's a generational change. So there's something to be said for persistency. But gambling has been around for a long time, and it is amazingly lucrative. I mean, all of Las Vegas was built on the 1% difference between what the house gets and what you get.
Yeah, you don't say. This happens with a lot of these sort of sin behaviors or whatever you want to call them, or at least from a policy perspective, where the people that ostensibly are charged with stopping the behavior or at least regulating it to prevent the worst outcomes have conflicts of interest. So and I see it with everything. So with assisted suicide in the UK, for example, right? You're seeing all of these news articles about, when people are ready to die, it's their time to die. And then you get to the bottom of the article, it says, if you're struggling with suicide, call,
Yeah.
And of course, when you buy a lotto ticket here in California, for example, you flip it over and it says, do you have trouble with gambling? Please call, So in other words, and maybe I'm too cynical, as I say a lot on the show, I don't know that anyone really wants to solve this because everyone to some extent is going to profit from it, whether it's lawyers that are going to file lawsuits or NGOs that are going to make money from the penalties paid by the industry itself.
Well, with gambling, it's even, there's a lot of money to be made here by everybody in the system. It's I wouldn't describe it necessarily as a rigged system, but the probability statistics do not work in your favor on an individual basis. So I think probably the salient take home is the fact that if in fact there is a problem, a social problem related to gambling, then maybe we should require the states to direct the monies that they make off of it to be directed at mitigating some of those ills. It's always that classic thing, that the lottery money is supposed to go towards education, but it turns out there was a shortfall somewhere else, so the educational money went to asphalt or some other, project in mind. And so, that would be one thing that we could do without, tampering with the idea, because we're certainly not going to outlaw gambling. That horse is long out of the park at this point. But again, it's an interesting thing when you one of the things I notice is you have this addictive behavior, and then you pair it with a second addictive behavior, which is your phone. And that really is a whole different synergism that gamblers had not previously experienced. I think I mentioned somebody, I doubt that I can find his name, but there was some lefty something or other who was the first person to think that it would be good to do gambling offshore because he could move the money around. He was very prescient in terming out that, that the internet would be the place where gambling would really take off.
Was that Lefty Rosenthal?
That was my boy, Lefty. Yes.
Yeah. He's the focus of that excellent movie Casino. That makes perfect sense that he would come up with that idea. Well, one thing I think of as you were talking a minute ago about making it the banking industry's problem. I've read about this in the news. There's a popular porn website that has been caught up in child trafficking and sex trafficking litigation. And the most effective way that the people going after them have found is to go to the credit card processors and say, hey, here's a video of, ghastly things being done on this website. You going to support this? And of course, it's a veiled threat. So they go, well, absolutely not, right? So MasterCard, and they pull their credit card processing, and as a result, this company, the company that owns the website, has actually just stopped serving certain states. So although you're never going to get rid of the activity, maybe by cutting off the supply of funds or at least limiting it, you could rein this in. What do you think of that idea?
I think it's a worthwhile thing. I mean, it's certainly in terms of an age verification. If you have to go into a bank to set up an account, let them eyeball you and say, yes, these are appropriate age-related credentials. Fine, now you have an account. Now, doesn't mean that your younger sibling won't run in and play on your account or something like that. But it's certainly better than the age verification systems that are currently available online, which just means you have to know that your birth year has to be before 21 years ago, and you're on board. So I think that there's there, and again, as I suggested, that's a statute that's already in place, and it involves the banking system, and the bankers don't really want to cross certain lines. It's not worth it to them. This is it's an important, but it's not the most critical portion of where their revenue streams are, and they're going to enforce that much better than we're going to get from some other third party.
So I'm channeling my, let's say my 23-year-old self, Chuck. I've just read Atlas Shrugged, and my life has changed, and I am a hardcore believer in individual liberty. And I'm thinking of arguments that I would throw at you in that headspace. And I'd say something like, bipolar disorder, depression, suicide. These are all chronic long-term issues that existed before gambling. And so you are just mixing up causation and correlation because you have an agenda. You're against freedom, or you're a fan of micromanaging people's lives. So why don't we solve these problems instead of blaming the gaming industry, which is just providing a service that's in demand? What do you say to that?
I don't have a problem with the gaming industry. I don't have a problem in that regard at all. But I think that it's hard to ignore the fact that problematic gambling results in social ills, and in this case, it's oftentimes social ills for the people closest around you, and so that it's worth not making them go away. You certainly have the right to do the things that you wish to do. It certainly within the betting space, but maybe it's prudent on a societal basis to, again, earmark some of the winnings to mitigating some of the apparent damage. That's all. I'm not for prohibiting things. It's going to go on anyway. We're not going to force it underground. Again, it's too lucrative to all the stakeholders to make go away. So if we can mitigate some of the harm by taking a small percentage from the platforms, then where's the problem?
So sort of a harm reduction approach in that,
Yes.
you're not gonna get rid of bowling, so just put up bumpers, and that way people don't throw so many gutter balls, and maybe we'll make the activity a little less deadly or dead inducing or whatever.
Okay, so we put bumpers on cars. We have we've built the cars in such a way that they're crash cages at this point, and which is an additional cost to building the car, which we pay for, and which makes them safer. It doesn't keep you from driving at 120 miles an hour into a pole, but it does increase your chance of getting out afterwards.
That will still end badly. Don't try that.
No, it's not recommended, and
Yeah.
you got to keep. The general rule we have, is you have to have your seatbelt on because you want to be in proximity to the car after the crash.
Yeah. The airbags
Being
are not
outside the car is
pillows.
a problem.
Yeah. The airbags are not pillows. It's not posture-peding. Okay, so again, it's a generational problem. It'll be solved over time if it's going to be solved at all. I don't know. Maybe it's having kids, Chuck, but I think as we wrap up here, I find it really troubling that, and maybe there's no way around it, but the activity becomes widespread, and then we go, oh shit, this really affects a lot of people, and there's people with very severe depression who are now digging themselves deeper into debt, and they're killing themselves, and their kids are not eating because they've spent all of their paycheck on, digital slot machines or I don't know. There's just, it's almost like it's an afterthought. We're like, now that the activity is legal, then we're going to put on all these stopgap measures and go, well, we'll do the best we can, but.
I'm trying to find the proper quote here for you on this. I think I have it. We're working on that. Yes. And here it comes from an expert in the area, Yogi Berra. In theory, there is no difference between theory and practice. In practice, there is.
Well said. Well said. That
Yogi understood many things beyond baseball. And it's good because we bring it right back around to baseball. We started with Pete Rose and we ended with Yogi Berra.
Look, we turned it all around. There it goes. That's why you listen to this show. That's why you tune in, for Chuck's witticisms and clever quotes. Okay. Well, once again, go read this article. Interesting stuff. It sort of put this on my radar because I didn't really think about this, but I think it's something that probably needs more attention. So once again, The Hidden Costs of America's Sports Betting Boom by Chuck. You're
done.
By Dr. Charles Dinnerstein. Goodness gracious, everyone. It's midweek. What can I say? That is at our website, acsh.org. Go to the subscribe tab, punch in your email address, and we'll send you the stories that we publish. The ones you read are the ones that we talk about. As always, thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.